How many people do you know you would say truly share your back to the land values? Or your passion for home-scale craft meat curing? Or simply love the multifaceted beauty of a good meal as obsessively as you do? Maybe a handful? At farmsteadmeatsmith.com, we've created an online community of hundreds of omnivores from around the world and a platform for them to learn from and inspire one another. In addition to our major semi-annual hands-on educational event, The Family Pig, here at our Pacific Northwest homestead, over at farmsteadmeatsmith.com, we host a purely digital membership program with an archive of film and textual resources years deep now, for you to dive deeper into your food journey with. And both our classes and online program include access to our private community Facebook page for your continued education and fellowship. We've been told that our classes are life-changing and the membership program unparalleled in quality and quantity. To get a taste of our education, search farmsteadmeatsmith.com and our YouTube channel for our free films, conversations, and downloads. Explore how we and other meatsmiths across the globe may best come alongside you, putting the knife in your hand, article by article, and comment thread by comment thread, and can support you in building your home around the harvest. Please head to farmsteadmeatsmith.com today.
Brandon just moved to a new place, and it is gorgeous in the background. We were just having some small conversations about his abode there.
Yeah, it's been a shift in focus. We spent all of our resource before on the land first, just clearing it so that we could live off of it and feed ourselves. And the house was the last thing we thought about. So our old house, we were camping. It was camping in a house, you know.
It is it opposite now? I mean, so you just moved from Washington to Oklahoma, if I understand correctly. So is it opposite now, or what does it look like?
I don't even know what this is yet, Daniel. I'm still figuring it out. I kind of can't believe what happened, but we have 10 acres and it's ready to go. It is fenced and cross-fenced, and there's a barn ready to go. And then the house is also, it's got like flooring as opposed to exposed subfloors and plywood, and the walls are painted. There's no holes in the drywall. It's incredible. So both sets, we got the domestic and the rural element. They are ready to go. So it's plug and play out here.
That's awesome. And did I hear you say 10 acres? Is that what you're on?
10 acres. Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Which is plenty for us. You know, it'll be great. We're right on the Arkansas River. So my sons have been down to the river almost every day. They have made fishing rods. They made fishing hooks out of wire that they found. And they have they've been fishing all the time. They're way into this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And in Washington, you were on two and a half. 2.5.
Yeah.
Wow.
A little square in the fir trees.
A beautiful place though.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, it's a wonderful place. And it was wonderful. It was a totally different forest scape, you know. We had 80-year-old trees, 80 to 90, and they're all 120 feet tall. And that's like all the firs around my house. And then we come here and I've got, 400-year-old oaks that are like 30 feet. Okay, 50. We got some 50-footers out there.
Wow.
So I'm really excited to dive into this totally different ecology. But, similar annual precipitation, similar nice long growing season. So there's some strange similarities here.
That's interesting.
On paper, at least.
Yeah. It's going to take some time to acclimate and adapt.
Yeah.
For sure. We actually got one question. We'll start with this real quick, and then we'll jump into the webinar, allowing some more people to get on. Liz is asking, she's not done with your podcast yet, but why Oklahoma?
Well, we had a few requirements that really restricted our search down. We really wanted to be close. Our primary goal is to be close to the traditional Latin Mass. We're Catholic. And a lot of these parishes are in cities, which was a problem because we need land. We want it to be in a rural setting. So, there's a few places where those two elements worked out. And for us, it really was, I mean, Tulsa kind of ended up being that. We can be just outside the city here, and it gets rural real fast, just outside of Tulsa, and still very close to the parish. So we can have, so we can really order everything teleologically in the right direction. And it means we're 13 minutes from the mass, from the church, which is important for us, which means we can go to mass every day. Before we were 2 hours. So that was quite a hike. And it was 12 miles, but it was just because of the ferry. We were on an island, so the ferry was quite prohibitive. But those are the two main reasons I would say that we landed in Oklahoma. And I know some people out here. But
Got it. Very, very cool. You guys just did a 2-part podcast, if I understand. I'm sure that's what Liz is referencing on
That's
your guys
right.
moving. What's your podcast called for everybody else?
It is called Meatsmith Harvest.
Why are you laughing?
Because I always forget the name of my own podcast.
Got it.
Regular.
Got it. The Meatsmith Harvest.
I think that's what it's called. If there are people in the comments that want to correct me, I am open to correction. It's so bad. Lauren has made the podcast too simple for me. She set it all up and made it beautiful and formatted so that I can just come down and sit down and we start talking. So I am woefully negligent about the actual name and the details of our podcast. A Meatsmith Harvest.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's just well, with that, let's start. Let's see. Let me just pull up some notes on this side. I actually thought about this beforehand, which is unique.
Nice.
Well, anyways, hello and welcome everybody to the inaugural chapter of the Conversationalist. This is an intimate webinar series running from November through January, built to inspire thought via conversating with the wild. I am Daniel Griffith, director of the Robinia Institute, the Mid-Atlantic hub of the Savory Institute, and we do a lot of other things, and then owner of Timshire Wildland. We're a 400-acre, we call ourselves an emergent and process-led reclamation landscape here in Virginia. It smells like a farm, it just doesn't look like one. And so that's a little bit of my personal context. That's all you need to know about me. But the vision of this series is to foster and nurture intensely deep and richly philosophical conversations around the co-creation of a much better world, a much more beautiful world, together in community and with the understanding of our places. A quick note on the title of this webinar series, The Conversationalist. It's actually taken from an essay from Wendell Berry, wherein I think it's nature as measure, if I remember the essay correctly. But he says an agriculture using nature as measure would approach the world in a manner of a conversationalist. It would not impose its visions and its demands upon a world that it conceives as a stockpile of raw materials. Now we must think of marriage. I think it's an absolutely beautiful and punishing quote at the same time. I think it is absolutely brilliant. And so we built a webinar series around it to foster that conversationalist rhetoric. And so these will be conversations leading to the co-creation of a more beautiful world by really stepping beyond the perception of nature as a raw material, right? And actually stepping into what I believe is our place within creation as nature as marriage, something that we participate with, not dictate over, if you will. So anyways, in the coming weeks, we'll be talking with Alan Savory, Joel Salatin, the Jefferson Center, Dan Kittredge of the Biological Food Association, and Fred Provenza about very similar topics to the one we'll be talking about today, but with different focal points, different perspectives, contexts, if you will. You can register for all of those webinar episodes and conversations on our site, robiniainstitute.com. A little housekeeping here. This podcast, I'm way too much in the podcasting spirit recently. This webinar is being recorded. It will be posted to YouTube and other mediums after this. And so please understand that when you're asking questions. The first half of this, from about 3:10 it is now Eastern Standard Time to about 4 or 3:40, 3:45, will just be a conversation between Brandon and I. And then I actually hope that we can do the rest of the conversation as long as we can keep Brandon in front of the screen here with your questions. And so having a continued and actually much deeper conversation that you guys get to lead, which I'm just stoked for, because I am uncomfortable on webinars. So I hope you guys ask a lot of questions. A little intro on Brandon, and then I promise to stop talking. Today's webinar is about descaling and humanizing the regenerative movement. Brandon is a poet and a philosopher in his own right. As you will see, he is much better with words than myself, and is overall someone who I look up to. I've been following Brandon's work for years now with his movies and tutorials and podcasts and writing. I mean, he's truly a power to be reckoned with in the human scale, small scale processing scene. It's a pleasure to have him here. He is the owner and operator of the Farmstead Meatsmith, the only abattoir, butchery, and educational operation of its kind in the country. Quick last little thing, I'm sure he's blushing, but that's okay. His family, I wrote this down so I didn't forget it. His family works seeks to restore husbandry to prosperity, locality to nourishment and ethics to regeneration. A quick, amazing note, this is actually what drew me to Brandon's work. Outside of his processing facility, his abattoir, if we can call it that, he offers 100% of the meat through the processing center back to the farmers, the owners, whoever is the recipient of that meat, as compared to about 50 to 60% in the USDA commercial meat processing scene. And so it's not just whole animal utilization from a nose to tail, leather to wool to hide to, meat perspective. It's not just eating the whole animal, it's actually getting the whole animal, right? It's whole animal utilization in a very holistic sense. So anyways, with that, Brandon, it is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. That was very kind. It's great to be a part of this. And yeah, it's been a journey. When you give an introduction like that, it makes it sound like we have known what we're doing for the past 10 years. And I guess that's when we started, was 2010. And so, but really it's been a gradual process of making lots of mistakes and errors, but pursuing a kind of a philosophical goal the whole time. And even then, it's only in hindsight that I can see that goal has been consistent. It doesn't even feel like it sometimes when you're in the middle of it. But just as a way to kind of get things started, I would say that when we started in 2010, and I guess it was really 2008, is when I sort of had my awakening as to my ability, which is common to all humans, and my desire to harvest my own animals. And that was very much it was really a philosophical thing. And it actually coincided for us with our conversion to Catholicism. And the move was, having read in undergraduate, in college, and then a little bit getting a master's degree, in humanities and stuff. I got to read Descartes, and Lauren and I both felt that we were living in a culture and a system where it was too easy to perceive ourselves as disembodied minds and intellects hovering over, like you were saying, a material substrate that we could extract or, variously rely on with mostly ignorance for our sustenance and to live. And it was only just the most vague sense of wanting to engage with that material in a more authentic way. So basically just to get to know and to become a part of the process that resulted in our sustenance. And that's as vague as it was, it was really not defined. And so what we found was, we should probably grow our food, because that seems to coincide with the nutritional benefits and demands our bodies, because look, we are, classically, we're rational animals. That's how we're defined. And so our bodies are actually part of a natural order. And it's actually an illusion that we could be not part of it. Even if we live in the most buffered, urbanized setting, you are still part of the food chain, and the cost of your existence echoes all the way down the line. And the only difference is not whether or not you're participating in it, but whether or not you're even aware of it. And we kind of live in an era when we can move along ignorant of the weight of our own existence and the cost it is on other beings. So it was really just wanting to tie into that. And then we even found that, it was in a related way, it was this engagement with our bodily reality that we saw that Catholicism made a lot of sense for us, because there's lots of genuflecting. There's lots of things that you do with your body that are meaningful. In fact, ultimately meaningful, hugely meaningful. So that was just the nascent, philosophical direction that we had, going on 11, 12 years ago now, and really vague and undefined. And it's been refined by simply going for it. And that's kind of what we have done from the beginning. It's like, I always relate to people, because a lot of people, I train a lot of people how to harvest their animals, how to do it in a small domestic scale. And the way I learned was I had a gun just pushed into my chest, and, not in a threatening way, but like, here, you shoot. I don't want to. And that's how I learned how to do it. And it is something that, we have this idea, particularly in a modern era where we value cerebral knowledge extremely highly because of how exploitable that makes us for our workforce. But the actual knowledge is gained in harvesting, in integrating into a natural environment through virtue. And virtue is habit acquisition. It's building good. It's so basic. I mean, this stuff is really basic, but it's building good habits. So it's literally, if you want to learn how to kill a pig or harvest your cow, or, rightly graze your sheep flock, you need to do it. You just need to do it. And you need to do it. I've always used the word docile, to do it with docility. So you are receptive to the cues that you're getting from the process itself. And in that way, you actually develop a habit of doing it. And when you develop a habit, that thing that you're doing gets easier, and you become proficient, and you have a virtue. You have the virtue of pig killing, or whatever it may be. And so rather than shackle yourself to a notion of, I've got to get all the preliminary knowledge acquired, and all of the abstract outlines downloaded into my data bank that is my brain, you would be shocked at how much you can learn with your body. And that's where most of our nerve endings are anyway, right? It's in our hands. And you learn with your hands so quickly if you just do things. And so, I host a Meatsmith membership, which is basically a group of people all around the world online. And we share our harvesting experiences and regional, specifically regional elements to harvesting and curing and everything, all on the domestic scale. But there's always these questions, that come in from the members. And the most common questions are, is this okay? Did I do this right? This mold looks a little weird. Is this okay? Or, we had a bad shot with a pig. And there's lots of people are hard on themselves in general, and they tend to want to make sure they're doing things rightly. And my answer is always, yes, it looks awesome. You did it well as you could. We can always get better. We can always harvest better. We can always manage our natural resources better, whether it be grass or forest or whatever. or the garden. But it's really, you find that when you just do it, because you are not a disembodied mind, but actually part of a natural order yourself, you are not swimming upstream when you just go for it. You are actually swimming with the order of nature, with the direction of the stream. And so there's lots of there's serendipity, to use a really ridiculous word, but there's things that make sense, they click, because you're not beating your head against a brick wall. You are acting in a way that is in accord with your nature and with the nature of your livestock or your land. And so much of that is just doing it. Go do it.
I had all these questions, and you know, an idea of where this conversation was going, and in due course, I'm a big fan of emergence. The conversation has gone a different way, a better way, and I have tons of other questions I've been writing down. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
First off, you were talking about your story and how you know, the context that you unexpectedly set at the beginning of it has been throughout of it, or has been the same throughout of it. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. My wife and I, we do a lot of talking, as I'm sure all couples do. But we talk a lot about in many movements, and the regenerative movement is not dissimilar to a lot of the popular movements of history and of modernity. There's always people in that movement that set out to lead it, right, or to heavily participate in it. And social media obviously makes that very very adaptable, right, to those people, and very scalable in some sense. It's interesting though. We've always followed your work, and I thought the opposite. You guys are that team of leaders that didn't set out to lead, and therefore everybody follows you, if that makes sense. And so that's not a pat on the back. Rather, I think it's in some sense, it's a method to follow, right? To learn with your hands is to do the thing itself, not to set out to train people, right? But to learn and then realize that a lot of people can learn from that learning. And that's how community grows. It's emergence via the communal system. So really interesting. I want to jump though to, you mentioned the word virtue. So you have a cerebral education. I have a similar education. You mentioned virtue, right? And you talked about habit acquisition, right? And to me, I'm thinking about Aristotelian virtue, right? Aristotle writes in his Nicomachean Ethics that the best flutist, or to be a virtuous flutist, right? To be the best virtuous, best playing of the flute you could be, it's you play it really well, right? The best flutist is the flutist, right? And there is virtue. In your video, which I'll push everybody on this webinar to, the Anatomy of Thrift. It's a 3-part video on your website, farmsteadmeatsmith.com, if I got the URL right. In that video, in the first one, I rewatched it today. I watched it when it first came out, but I rewatched it today as a little refresher. You say that agriculture is built on regionally specific habits. Can you connect that phrase back to virtue, and what do you mean by habits? And what does tradition, agriculture, habits, time on task have to do with any of it?
Wow, yeah, that's what's so fun about this medium actually that we're using right now is because we have been estranged from the regionally specific habits as a result of, you know, centralization of so many of these processes and alienation from them that produce our food. We have lost the other essential element, which is tradition, which is literally, it's not an abstract, codified, you know, set of principles that are imposed upon things. It's literally that which is passed down from generation to generation. So it's intensely practical. And it can take the form of custom as well, but it literally refers to, you know, the passing of knowledge, of culture from one generation to the next. That is like tradere. I could make up what the Latin root is, but I know it means passing from one generation to the next.
You're good. We would all believe you, by the way.
Yeah.
We would all believe you. It's good.
Just give it a little Latin, it's legitimacy right away. French has the same effect in culinary stuff. So, but And that's the big void. And I think that that's how Lauren and I could get started in this, not intending to be leaders, but there was a void there, big time. And it was just gaping and yawning, people desiring the tradition that they did not receive. And I think we are in an era of absconding fathers in a way. You know, how many of us, even in our generation, are like, man, you know, my grandfather, or, you know, sometimes for our generation, it's my great grandfather. He knew how to do this, whatever agricultural task it may be. He had the knowledge, and then it didn't get passed on. You know, it was the line of tradition was broken in some way. And that has been really fun to create this network through Farmstead Meatsmith, largely, of people literally going around and finding their old traditions. So what I have had to do, you know, coming from the Pacific Northwest most recently, and then coming here in the Pacific Northwest, it's such a young place. That's the other thing we're finding. They're not traditions for, you know, how to cure a ham in Washington State. The oldest one is probably from the Hudson Bay Company, which is British. And they're in, you know, out there in Vancouver, and they were doing it the British way, which kind of works in the Pacific Northwest. But that's about as close as you get, you know, and that's only in the 1860s, you know, so that's very recent. So for many reasons, we lack that tradition. And so a lot of it is we're relearning these regionally specific habits of food making without the benefit of being shown by our fathers and mothers how to do it. In most cases, some of us do have that. And so instead, you actually have to exercise self-discipline and not avail yourself of all of the technological advances that make it possible for you to ignore the limitations of your region. And so this has been our journey, largely, is doing things, killing animals, cutting them, curing them, without the apparatuses that make that a simple and smooth process, even without refrigeration. And you find when you do that, you stumble into what your fathers did, because they didn't have those things either. And all of their regional hams, their regional products, the way they aged beef, all of that was a result not of their particular tastes or what their likes and their dislikes. That was a result of their limitations, of what their region produced with the least amount of coercion, which is just another way to understand efficiency or husbandry. And when you fall in line with those limitations, that's actually, when you discover them, you've got to figure what they are first. And then to me, that's actually the definition of poetry, is when you find the limitations and then you create within them, you create what was made for that place. That's kind of what terroir means, to drop a French word. And that's where the art, that's where the poetry is. And that's where you get, you know, to me at least, that's where you get flavors that are actually beyond your expectation. You know, you get goods that arise from the natural order itself in due recognition of its limitations. And that's where you get, you know, things coincide in ways you can't anticipate previously if you're only going for your likes and dislikes. Because our likes and dislikes are too low. Those are our lower appetites. We can't reach as high as our own limitations can bring us. That's all very abstract, but that's kind of where we're at now, is you got to discern your limitations to develop these regional habits. You know, when is the good time to kill the pig if you're not going to do it with refrigeration? And you find that date and you do it then, and then you discover what you can cure by what your climate does and how it does it. And it takes a little time to develop that knowledge, but it's not that much. You can do it, you know, especially when you get together with other people and share your harvesting experiences, or, you know, hopefully find someone who is who remembers down the road and can lead you through it.
Right. I'm thinking about the word emergence. Emergence is a term we would use in many different industries, mathematics, all the way through agriculture. The idea that all life is co-creating, self-organizing in a way that is non-linear, non-mathematical, and is very holistic, but it's so much further and above and beyond that which can be designed, right? So you were talking about tastes and flavors being the limit, right? And how when you're working regionally within these traditions and habits, how you can actually produce something far and above that which you were expecting. So it's almost like, and I'm kind of trying to shift over to the idea of descaling, but it to me, and you can correct me, it seems what you're saying is that when you work regionally, right, when you create these regional habits that form your agricultural all the way through the harvest, right, which is still agricultural, when you form these agricultural paradigms or systems or philosophies, whatever it is, that the product is emergent, right? It's so much above and beyond that which one whole, right, within the greater whole, one human species within the greater network of other species can predict or design.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the only way to, because part of descaling and going small size is the act of mortifying our appetite for massive distribution and the efficiency that centralization provides. It is much easier to not kill your own cow if we're just going for comfort and ease, right? But you weren't made for that. And you sacrifice everything else when you accept that luxury. And that's what I like about, the Amish communities. And it's easy for people to, you always hear this when people speak about their Amish neighbors or something, they'll always add like a qualifier, like, well, they're not really Amish. They have a telephone, or they do use gas sometimes for these various things because they don't meet our idealized form of what an Amish community should look like, not being Amish, which is weird. But it's a silly consideration, because even when they do have those varying rules of their communities and varying degrees of adopting modern technologies, the point is that they're doing it consciously. They're picking their technology. They're not being chosen by the inevitable progress of their technology. Wow. So they're not slaves to it, even if they have more or less, than their neighboring community. It's like, no, the point is they're not in a master-slave relationship between the inevitable progress of technology and having to keep up with that. So descaling is part of, actually, because that is a massive technological endeavor. I mean, obviously, and it happens mostly, the large scale processing happens mostly behind closed doors, so we don't see it. So we're not always acquainted with just how massive it is, and how technological and how dependent it is, and fragile, until recently, fortunately. But it's, I would say that the precondition for this local expression of harvesting and getting more integrated with your terroir, with the limitations of your place, is localizing the harvesting. And I think we're at the point now where we just have to do that. And the whatever way you manage to do that, I think it's good to note the rules and the regulations of your area and follow them insofar as they are not ambiguous and insofar as they serve the common good. But when they cease from doing that, they cease from being just laws. And at a certain point, I think you just have to harvest your cow the way it is owed that cow to be harvested, in justice, and in justice to your own land.
Would you say, so you use the word locality, local, right? And now we're talking about regulations and things. Mm-hmm. Is there, let me see if I can craft this question appropriately. So locality, especially in a lot of the rhetoric and pushed ethics of this movement, the regenerative movement, locality, it originally was place-centric, right? It was true to what I believe the term means, right? Local, neighbors, physical locality. I think as the regenerative movement has grown, and I don't necessarily think that this is entirely negative, but it's different, and we have to understand its difference. We have to understand that the vocabulary, the grammar here follows the difference, and that is that locality now just means not being close to the farm, but knowing your local farm, right? So I can order really good meat online, right? In that sense, I feel like I'm shopping local, right? Because as maybe I went to that farm one time and it's just inconvenient for my modern lifestyle to go to that farm every week to pick it up or whatever it would be, meet at the farmer's market or what have you, buying clubs, co-ops. Doesn't matter the method of distribution. The point is that because I know my local farmer, I see it then as local, right? Yeah. So you have that paradox. There's complexities there that don't seem to be entirely natural. So when you say the word local, right, that we have to start processing you said cows locally. What does that mean? What do you mean by local?
Yeah, that's a good point. When I think of it, inherent to that definition of local is dependence upon each other. And so, you know, when we acquire things locally from farms around us, it is very much it's a distance thing. And we try to stay in our town. And I'm, to a degree, you know, insofar as it doesn't compromise, you know, my family's health, to which I am primarily responsible, we might even make other compromises on other realms to go local. You know, well, if there's certified organic raw milk in the next town, and there's good milk right here, but you know, it's not necessarily organic. Because it's closer, we'll get the more local stuff. Because there's a possibility for subsidiarity, which is where we actually exist in a closer network with that person that is, we're actually dependent. We can be mutually dependent, particularly as you get involved in the local agrarian economy, providing whatever service you do. So that's what I find is there's this great old principle called subsidiarity. And it's basically whatever unit can accomplish a particular task, that is what that unit of society should do. And the larger unit, the larger conglomeration should subside, like literally sit back and let the smaller unit do it. So that keeps the authority and in the smallest unit of human society that it is competent to execute. And that's now we tend to move up to the higher level, you know, the higher level of organization and more broad, not because of their competency, but because of, I don't know, a million other reasons that are way complex and tend to the dissolution of localized dependency and economy. So yeah, slaughtering locally, I mean, this is the thing that always blows my mind. The demand is there across the entire country. Everywhere I've been, everywhere, without exception. People are telling me, you know, I called my butcher and he said I could schedule my pig slaughter in 2 years. You know, that's what I can get on his calendar.
That's today, you know? Yeah.
That's not hyperbolic. That is every single state that I have visited and done classes in. So the demand, the void, again, the void is there and it's yawning for people to fill that gap, to start harvesting animals. Yeah, and it's hard to say exactly, you know, I can't give like a distance limitation on how close should your slaughterhouse be. You know, it might not even make the most sense for him to come to you, you know, if you can have these localized slaughterhouses, and maybe in some regions for whatever limitations, it makes more sense for you to bring the animal to him. There's an infinite degree of variability there, but if you can harvest locally, then you can cull, and if you can cull, then you can manage your land and your herd.
Right. It's interesting, your note on the desire for people to remediate the system. You're coming out to our farm here at the end of November, just about a month from now. You're teaching a course, as you know. but I told you yesterday, we were having this pre-session call for this webinar. We have more people on a wait list for that course than we have people in the course. And the course is capped at 20 students, 20 individuals, not including myself and you, right? And that's the demand of people not just wanting to receive the gift from the system, but to participate in the system themselves, right? These people are coming to process a beef on our farm and learn from you on how to do it, maybe so they don't have to spend, 15 years learning how to do it themselves. Expedite the process, make it a little bit more efficient for themselves. But the point is, in both sides, right, you have the consumer and the individual who wants to be a part of that process. With that, the statement wasn't just pure statement. There's a question here. Does the idea of descaling, bringing it truly down to the local, I like your word here, down to the dependence, right? Locality is dependence. I like that. Bringing the regenerative movement down to this scale to then improve it, right? To then enrich it. We say here at Robinia that we must scale the regenerative movement by keeping it small. That's our focus. So in order to do that, where is the farmer? Where is the husbandman located? Is it just within the raising and the rearing and the calling of the animal? Or is there a role for the farmer, that husbandman, to play in the actual death process of that animal? Asked another way, because I think this terminology is interesting, regeneration implies a cycle of birth, life, growth, death, rebirth, right? We see that in all forms of life, created life here on this planet. Where does the farmer's role stop? Is it just in the birth, life, growth, or does he or should he participate in the death and the rebirth cycle of the nourishment coming out of his landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know exactly, but I think that if we look at history, we can see that everyone on, the food chain, I guess, is participating in a more intimate way with the death, including the consumer, just by virtue of the localized processing. So it's literally just more in your sight. I mean, if there are more slaughterhouses and they're small and they're all over the place, you are going to be acquainted with the process of death, of the killing, more than obviously these centralized places that are hundreds of miles away. And, even the consumer, you can read about, they still maintain at least the shadow of this in England, where you can still find tiny, tiny butcher shops, just holes in the wall, really small, all over, even just the city of London. And they are, relics of a time of smaller processing. And now they're sourcing their meat more centrally. Nonetheless, you can read these accounts of when there's more small scale processing, it is going to be more transparent. And when it is more transparent to the consumer or to the farmer, the quality of the slaughter is going to increase, such that you can have this phenomenon called backdressed lamb this was even like just 60 years ago. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but backdressed lamb is so beautiful. And it comes from the slaughterhouse. So it comes from the guys that are doing the dirty work behind closed doors. Nobody wants to see that. No, that was an artful position to be an abattoir not that long ago. And it is really recent that this stuff has got so intensely centralized. And they would do backdressing lamb. And it was for the Easter lamb. It was the first lamb of the season. It was a big deal. And it was not just a big deal for the display case for the retail butchers. It was a big deal for the slaughterers who had to do it artfully. And backdressing a lamb is you execute the kill, and then you skin the lamb in such a way as to retain all of its fell, which is that muscle that twitches when they get flies off of their hide. And they would actually then break the ribs just where they connect to the sternum in such a way to create lines that radiate out, so almost like a monstrance in a church. It's really beautiful. And then they would pin the sweetbreads and the pluck, which is the lungs and the liver, on this, like in this little display case made by the ribs. And then they would drape the caul fat around the back legs of the lamb. And the caul fat is this beautiful lace made of fat that surrounds the guts of the internals of any quadruped, actually. And they would drape that around the back legs and it would harden. And then they would even like carve leaves in the fell muscle on the back. And they would, these lambs would line the shops, the butcher shops, and customers would buy a whole lamb. These are just consumers, but you would go because you had tradition that you received. This is Easter. This is the biggest deal in the calendar. So we're going to have Easter lamb for the feast, right? And you buy your whole Easter lamb. And the reason that they pinned the offal onto the carcass for display in the butcher shop was not just because the housewives wanted to take it home and consume it. That was obvious. It was because the housewife was discerning enough. She was acquainted enough with the kill, with the life and death of an animal, to tell which lambs were healthy and which weren't, which had been hanging there for a little bit and which were really fresh, judging by the oxidization on those offal, because nothing registers the passage of time like lamb lungs and liver, you know. So there's this acquaintance, even on the consumer level, with the harvest, with the husbandry. And I don't know, you know, the degree to which that is ideal or how far that should be, even for the farmer or the consumer. But at the very least, if there was more slaughtering going on, you know, just 5 doors down from most of us, and if that's where we got a lot of our meat, there would be an automatic acquaintance with the process, more intimacy with the death. And it's our alienation from that process that now has impoverished all of our cooking and our philosophy and our health and everything. Wow. So yeah, that's a really good question.
I got way too many questions. I think we can be here. This is not a cliche. I literally have hours more of questions, which we won't get to. We'll pick another time for it. I want to ask one more question and then get to some questions. So if you're listening and you want to ask some questions, put them in the chat, and or just raise your hand. I think I can give you speaking power, and if I can't, just put it in the chat. So get those questions going, and we'll spend some time here at the tail end of this conversation with you guys. The last question I want to ask, and earlier we were talking about Aristotelian virtues and the flutist, right? So the virtuous flutist is a good flutist. Mm-hmm. If you could say it that simply, and obviously you can use more words, but using that Aristotelian simplicity, what is a good processor, right? What is a virtuous abattoir, you know, operator? Yeah. What does that look like? What does it mean to be a good flutist?
Yeah, I think, it's a simple question, but there's so many answers to that. And it's only because I'm enmeshed in that exact profession. And eudaimonia, right? It's that Greek, that Aristotelian concept of once the good is attained, you know, the happiness of that. And I feel like that, what that looks like in a processor changes over time, not because the standard of processing changes, but because the attacks on it, the threats to it change over time, and the compromises change over time. One of the biggest ones right now, and I think it's not in my personality to alight upon this as a primary problem, but it just keeps being so obvious and evident. And it's that local processors, small scale processors, do not charge a living wage. And this is pandemic. This is everywhere. And it's very bizarre to me. And it's kind of a gap in their knowledge. And that's not a small thing, because that means you don't have your ends rightly ordered. And so consequently, when you call your local processor, they tend to be exhausted and angry. And, you know, you've all experienced this. They can't afford to keep a secretary or a calendar. And it sounds like a small thing and maybe a mundane thing, but it means that every day, day in, day out, they're not experiencing the virtue of good slaughter. They are being chased by their own schedule, hounded like pursued animals. They're miserable to keep up with things. And then they don't do a good job and inevitably get complaints from their clientele. And so they just develop this thick skin, this iron wall of like, I am punching the clock. Don't talk to me. Don't look at me. Don't think about me. Here we go. We're just going to slaughter these animals. And maybe you'll get the one you brought. Maybe you'll get somebody else's. So that's the biggest attack, I think, currently on local processing. If we could just get the small scale processors that we currently have to get out of that cycle and to be able to make a living wage, because most of them are paying their employees, if they have them, more than they bring home. And that is just, for whatever reason, totally standard in this industry. But all of that to say, I think on a more abstract, on a more general level, like what a good butcher, a good processor looks like is, it's similar to many other trades. You'll see this in good builders, like a guy that can frame a house really well, that can frame in a spiral staircase, right? Just not easy. But the thing about an artisan that has the virtue of that thing is that it looks like magic. And like literally, you cannot deduce just by observation how they are so efficient. When you watch someone doing something very well, unless you have to do it to know how good they are, right? Because there's such subtle movements. There's so much subtlety to their craft that they have honed, again, as a habit. And so it gets easier for them, which elevates the quality. That it looks like shorthand, sleight of hand. It looks like a sleight of hand trick. I see that when I see guys that are better at, skinning cattle than I am. It's beautiful. It's shockingly beautiful to me. And it looks like magic. It's sleight of hand. And that's an indication that they have developed a habit of that particular thing. And that will actually increase their efficiency and increase their worth. If it takes them less time to do it well, that makes them more valuable as an artisan. And coming back again to how these small processors need to charge for their time, if they're doing it well. Just if it takes you less time, that doesn't mean you lower your prices. That means you've developed a virtue and you're doing a better job. So that's a huge part of it, I think, is the habit of doing it well. And also, I think that my mindset is to always be docile to the harvest. So when I pull up to a job, I have to be receptive to the nature of the pig, to the nature of the cow, unique to that farm, because they're different from farm to farm. And I have to discern not only how best to kill them, because they're all different. And I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but they really are. And if you want to get a good kill, you have to treat them as individuals. How to get a good kill, but then how to get the proper yield to return everything, like you said, 100% hanging weight, plus if they want their offal back to the grower, back to the farmer. That changes with the particular physiology of each species of livestock and each breed within each species. So a lard pig is a far different thing than a Yorkshire pig and ought to be harvested in accordance with its nature. So I think we have to expand our vocabulary as slaughtermen, as butchers, to include the variability in all of our livestock and actually be receptive and docile to the yield, or to the animal, to the harvest, and to allow that to determine the yield, not the cut sheet, and not even necessarily what your customer says they want back from their own animal, because usually they're going with their likes and dislikes. And unfortunately, they have developed a habit of only getting 40 to 60% of their carcass weight back. So I'm the guy that gives, my customers their pig heads back, and they're like, gee, thanks, a beautiful hairless pig head for the freezer, Right. So there's this, again, you got to get into a relationship and you got to teach people how to cook, which is the whole other dialogue that I could talk about for 2 hours, but the cookery is essential to this as well.
That's just brilliant. It seems to me like we're back on the term dependence again. you know, the virtue of the artistic philosophical virtue of the butcher outside of the very economic understanding of what you know, your time is worth, and the value, right, of what that time produces, is that idea of dependence, right?
Yeah.
Full circle. That's really interesting. Man, I wish we could sit here for hours. I really actually do. I'm like biting my tongue, which is not typical. I'm not somebody who likes outrightly extroverted like activities, which I would see this as one, and I am foaming at the mouth to continue the conversation. I do want to get to questions though. I want to get to questions. Let's see, Jordan, if we liberated the harvest, we'll be liberating the centralized stronghold that's bottlenecking our ability to be in touch with regional, local food. More of a statement, but something if you want to address. Liberating the harvest. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to liberate the harvest. One of the ways is to completely change all of the policy, or from the perspective of a farmer or someone who wants to get into the processing, is to discerningly ignore the policy, you know, and to do what you need to do, knowing full well that you're taking upon yourself a very large burden, right? Which anyone who generally endeavors to do that is aware of that. So yeah, liberating. And on my end, I try to just teach people how to do it and liberate. You know, the happy effect of education is usually liberating oneself from fear of doing it wrongly. And that's a big part of what I do. And I feel like it can make my classes anticlimactic, you know, to just be constantly saying like, yeah, you just need to go for it. You know, you will figure it out. Because again, this is not a knowledge that's alien to us. This is within our prowess. Like, this is in our abilities. We are designed for acquiring our own food. We can do it.
That's interesting. Liz, I'm just going to keep going. There's some questions coming in respect of your time. In keeping it small, do you advocate for the farmer who raises the animal to also be their own butcher? Is there still a place for that to be separate? Would you descale things all the way back down directly to the family farm?
It's a great question. And I don't know. So appetitively, I'm like, yeah, all the way down to family farms. Let's just do it and have mutual dependency, you know, just across the fence line, you know, neighbor to neighbor. At the same time, though, I think there's definitely room for specialization. And that's, you know, when you get, we used to have this a little more. The guild system reflected some of this, you know, in the Christian era, or the Middle Ages. The guilds reflected this capacity for specialization, because they would create standards, and they would be great charitable organizations, again, to support the families that were members of the guild. And so I think that, you know, we have, in our modern era, as a pragmatic move, we have to pick our battles. We have to pick our battles because, man, I mean, you know, just being in you know, small scale agriculture, very few, if anyone, makes all of their daily bread, their necessary income off of their small scale ag endeavors. Almost none. I mean, it's extreme minority. And so I think just pragmatically, we have to pick our battles, and we shouldn't. I think if you're a grower, if you're a farmer, you will have plenty of animals to kill because they reproduce. And I don't think you should necessarily obligate yourself as a moral imperative in an abstract sense to kill your own animals, to be the one that does that. Because I think that can cripple you a little bit. And it's, you know, part of allowing someone else to take on that responsibility is that's what gives birth to a local economy. Is if there's enough of you that have that void and someone can stand up and fill it, then you have a little more dependency there on a local level again. So I get, because we're just such infants, myself included, we're so new and just trying to figure out what it means to raise an animal, to care for it morally and properly, and to execute our responsibility to the land we own and to kill it well. I think our initial inclination is just to take on all the moral responsibility, and like, we got to do this perfectly, and it's got to be pure and perfect. And I think it can be, but you gotta pick your battles at the same time. So you only have so much time. You only have so much lifetime. It's kind of all that we have. So if that means you're focusing on building topsoil right now, rather than building your own processing facility, then do that.
Yeah, it seems like extreme moral purity, right, relinquishes our dependence on right, on our neighbors,
Yeah.
Our details aside, Tim Scholl, our farm here in Central Virginia, we're in the middle of a massive project concerning this subject, and we reached out to Brandon a couple months ago, I think, just to kind of bring in his experience. And before the call, I'll never forget, I was not shaking or anxious or depressed, but like, there was a huge weight upon me that my wife was like, Daniel, just get through the call. He'll help. It was heavy. It's a big decision, and a lot of design or knowledge that I didn't have. And I remember on the call, you were just like, Daniel, just start, just do it. And, we've been doing this for thousands of years. We're pretty good at it. And you'll figure it out. And I remember hanging up the phone, and I just was like, wow, dependence isn't a negative word, is my point. That's what I'm trying to circle back to. Dependence, right, I was, before the call, depending on myself. After the call, I was depending upon your tenure, right, in this ancient tradition of animal harvesting, right, as a human species. And I was dependent on you. And in that dependence, there was virtue, and that virtue alleviated all of the burden on me. At least that was the unintentional result, unless it was intentional on your end. I don't know. You're quite brilliant, but
that's great. And I would say too, to that commenter also, that along that vein of dependence, you can have many levels of on-farm processing, and that's what I find I end up doing a lot, is dispelling the complexity that surrounds the killing, the chilling, the keeping things clean of a carcass. And it need not be what you have seen, or what that vision of the pristine, sterilized room, with butchers and lab coats and stuff. To just do simple on-farm slaughtering, which you're inevitably going to have to do just to manage your herds or your flocks or your sounders, whatever they may be. You're going to have to do it anyway to have good management. And so there's many lower degrees, very simple equipment. I mean, I conducted my business full-scale service with a pickup truck and a chain hoist. I didn't have a winch or a crane or anything for 5 years or more. So it's very, very doable on your farm on a very small scale.
That's a good transition to Kelly's question. Kelly, what resources would you suggest for farmers who want to be more involved in the harvest of our animals? Where can we learn more?
Yeah, I mean,
you can plug yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to plug myself on that one. That's kind of what we do, and it's all geared towards the small scale. It's an assertion of delight in the human scale. It's not just we should do this because it's good for us, it's good for the planet, it's good for our local economy, even though that's all true. It's also just what works best, and it's good for you and for your family, for the human scale. So farmsteadmeatsmith.com is our website, and we have an online membership that involves it's membership to a closed Facebook group, videos that I put up there on a regular basis, and then monthly live chats that we do, lots of PDFs and of like tools lists, again, of those varying levels of how much you want to equip yourself to harvest on your property. And to be honest, you can do all of it with like a sharp knife. So there's that. And connecting people regionally, you know, because people are going to do, I'm going to do it one way here in Oklahoma once I figure out how to do it here, than someone in Vermont, you know.
Right.
So that, I think, I can't think of a better resource than what our members have brought, you know, to the Meatsmith membership. It's really great. Yeah, and I offer classes regularly. We've even got some on the calendar here in Oklahoma. It's a 3-day pig slaughter class, and we cover the whole thing. It's, you know, slaughter one day, and we do 2 pigs, butchery day 2, curing and cooking on day 3. And you'd be surprised when you behold the whole thing as one continuous narrative, rather than, you know, separated slaughter over here, butchery over there, and cooking in a different facility. When you see it as a whole narrative, it becomes intelligible, and you realize, oh, this is a narrative I can follow. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's actually not that complex, and you can do it. Yeah, there's a Hand Hewn Farm in Ohio. Those guys are great. They're doing this similar thing, Dave and Andy. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. For sake of time, I think Brandon and I will keep talking for a little bit longer. Feel free to sign off. This will be recorded. Feel free to stay on. We'll keep talking until Brandon says he has to go. I have some things to do this evening, but thank you for everybody who got to come. It's interesting. In college, I was a math major, history major, and a couple other things. I have way too much interest in way too many things. But I remember my senior year, there was this capstone course. It was more political science than history, but we got to read the whole course. We read Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. That was the entire course. Did one book. Cool. It was really, really cool. It was a seminar course. But I'll never forget in Democracy in America, which for folks that are listening, Alexis de Tocqueville, 1840s, was a Frenchman that came to the United States, and we wrote this massive volume on his understanding of what makes America different, or what makes democracy in America, which is not something new, right? Democracy at this point in human history is quite old. What makes American democracy different? And he obviously says a lot, hundreds upon hundreds of pages of what his thoughts are. But one of them is that the natural tendency he believed in American democracy for its citizenry would be a drift towards tradition. And he even went so far to say that America in the future will be a Catholic nation, because its citizenry will yearn, right? Because if you think about it, you know, I was talking to a builder the other day. We have a big building project here. I was talking to the contractor, and I said, hey, listen, buildings and mold and decay and rot stress me out. Just the idea that we're building something that's going to one day fall apart is stressful to me. I would much rather build a teepee, right, out of skins that I've tanned, and then as soon as it started to rot or fall over, I would just burn it and build a new one, right? Like, that's my mentality. And he looks at me, he goes, "You're in America, right? Nobody in Europe would say what you say. That's very American for you to say that." And I think that's what de Tocqueville saw, Alexis de Tocqueville. He saw that in America, right, it's a free, open land. Democracy looks different here for all of these reasons, but there's still that yearning in the human soul to need tradition, right? Yeah. Whether or not it's ancestral legacies, which you see in herbivores, right? So like you can manage a herd to build the legacy, the patriarchs and the matriarchs to raise and rear the young. That's beautiful. So I guess it's not a total human quality uniquely. But my point is, and then I want to get your opinions here, but my point is that it seems natural for American citizenry, or just humans in general, to yearn for that tradition, right? Those habits that form local traditions that then inform virtuous action in the local sphere. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that right now. I mean, that's even on the shallow level, our architectural preferences, you know, it's always faux something traditional, right?
Right.
Always. And even though it's faux, you know, it's a fake imitation, it's a simulacrum of it. We we just relentlessly go after that. You know, we always have textured walls. Like, why do we take the extra step to do these silly, like, boogers all over our drywall? You know what I mean?
Yeah, or that fake ceiling, you know, along the I don't know what you call it, but like there's a lot of unnecessary drywall up there, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Behind you.
Yes, there is. Yeah. And we're always, even in the cheapest building, like the most consistent architectural motif in American building, which is all very temporal. It's all just balloon framing, you know, 2x6s and 2x4s. And we're cracking slabs everywhere. And all these houses are going to vanish within a century, you know, and we're going to just have to keep building them. There's this constant architectural motif of some imitation of a traditional element. I totally agree. We have that there. I think of that when I think, just like your building quandary, I totally relate to that big time. And it takes an act of will for me to be more pragmatic about it, because I have to build my shop here now. I don't have a shop yet. I got to build one so I can start working. And my first thought is, all right, I'm going to go into the woods with my axe, and I'm going to fell the most beautiful oaks, and I'm going to excavate the bedrock that we're sitting on right now, and create foundation stem walls with dry stacked stone. And we're just going to do this, and it's going to take 50 years, and then I'll have a shop that is derived from this place. But I can't do that. Now, oddly enough, for me to do that would be such an assertion of luxury. I'd have to be, it's nonsense. Can't work. So that is a constant push and pull. And I think that one of the effects of that is that, in addition to us yearning for tradition, yearning to receive something from our fathers and our mothers, is the desire to pass something on of value. Can you imagine building something that your child wants on your property, wants to be there forever, and pass on to their children and their children and their children, to actually create something of such value that they can look at the rest of the world and be like, no, this stone building or whatever, this tower, this is what I want. And that is this multi-generational charity that it takes a long time to develop. And we're just such a young country, and for a million reasons, we have kind of severed ourselves literally with an ocean from that, from receiving all of that. Because you can go to Europe, like I got to visit England, and actually for the Savory Institute, I got to go to one of their international conferences and do a beef butchery demo. And it was in London, and then I got to go to Devon to do a pig butchery class. Awesome. And it was so good. It was the first time I'd ever been to England, and I only had like a day there. So I got up really early, and I just went on this multi-hour walk all over Devon. And again, it's exactly what you say. I could feel that void of, look at how much is received here, down to the size of the pastures. They're engraved in stone walls everywhere. And these are stone walls that were built 500 years ago. So they have been received by every single generation since then. All of the homes, there's no new construction, and all the paddocks are 5 to 10 acres, and all the gates are done, and all of the stones are there. And they've been building topsoil for almost that long in some of these regions there. They've just got it dialed, and all of that is a gift from their fathers. So I get the traditional void big time. And even in the Catholic world now, there is, I don't know what it was about the 60s, but on every realm of culture, it seems like there was a break. And I think that's how you define revolution. It is a break from the tradition of the fathers. And just within the Catholic Church, there was a break in the 60s to a degree. It's still continuous, but there was a break with the old liturgy. And now my generation is rushing back to the old liturgy, which we received from our fathers. I mean, literally, it's 2,000-year-old liturgy. It's got stuff that's before Christ in it, and it's my generation now that wants to go back to that pre-1960s liturgy. So yeah, Pope Benedict XVI, the last pope, he described our age as an age of absconding fathers, meaning,
Wow.
among many other things, but one of them being just the tradition. It's a failure to transmit their tradition, and on many realms.
It's interesting. The thing that I can think of immediately in your words or from your words is, my wife and I, we talk a lot about the idea of the tribe. I mean, you have this indigenous understanding today, which I think is potent and powerful and true. And then you have books like Sebastian Junger, I think, just wrote a book called Tribe, and it's a pretty good book. Understanding that humans are naturally yearning for this tribal relationship, right? Like you were saying, a dependence on the individual on the other side of your property's fence line. But what the conversation her and I often have is that as long as Walmart, as long as Amazon exists, the tribe is incapable of ever resurging, right? We can't ever have a revolution back to the tribe as long as my daily needs are not coming from my neighbor, right? And as long as I can get whatever I need at any point in time delivered to my door, I have no actual need, right? It has removed dependence, right? Globalism or extreme modernities or the modern complex of industrial, like all of those terms, all of those realities have reduced our dependence on ourselves, on our local surroundings, and on the human communities all around us. So it'd be interesting to see as we move forward through 2021 and 2022, and perhaps maybe, Lord willing, we work to descale the regenerative movement, right? In some sense, and maybe this is a good definition of what I mean by descaling the regenerative movement. It's forming that dependence on locale, right? Yeah. So my wife and I, we do a lot of wild foraging. The majority of our winter foods actually come from autumn wild foraging escapades. And we missed the oak harvest this year. We just missed it. We were actually quite sick when it happened, and we just didn't make it. And there was like a moment where we missed the opportunity, right? It's gone. It was here and it's gone, and we were dependent on that timeline, right? And we missed it. It's over. There's no Walmart, right, for oak nuts that you can buy, like that doesn't exist, right? And so as you get more dependent, as you get more connected to the natural or wild world, right, the world outside of your doorstep, more of that tribal type world, dependence becomes a word that means a lot to you. Right. And so maybe descaling the regenerative movement is the understanding that the human community and all other tangential communities, be them all created communities, created species all around us, we're dependent on each other. And as soon as we start to understand that, maybe we co-create a much more beautiful world.
Yeah, I've heard it described really well, because our modern era is constantly bouncing back and forth between, it's always pitting and polarizing the good of the community or the social unit against the good of the individual. And it's a constant tension, and we're constantly creating conflict around that on the political realm and just across the board. It's kind of the modern era. I think one thing that defines it is, and we can even define our political parties that way, we're swinging to the absolute rights of the society over the individual, or the absolute rights of the individual over the society. And it's just back and forth. And that's all of our modern day revolutions. And I got that from a priest once who articulated it that way. And so that, mutual dependency, we're always worried about like the infringements of our rights, and, sometimes rightly so as individuals. And then we're concerned about the dissolution of society, and it's got to be reoriented. And I think one of the pre-modern elements of life before the removal of the fathers, of the tradition, and literally of the monarchies, was that the family was the paradigm for understanding human society. And even on a macro level, and we don't think of it this way because we never think of monarchy, but like the king is the father, that's his role. And when the modern republics started to take shape, and with modern revolutions, he considered his role to he wasn't a political figure. He was actually, his role was to protect his people from their politicians frequently, for the small period when kings and politicians coexisted. But all of that to say that we have very vague notions of what it means to be in a society, to be, like we were talking about earlier, to be in a mob, as like, the vicious form of democracy, which is mob rule, or the absolute rights of the individual against that. We have these deficient ways of understanding these groups, when I think what we had before, at least, the 19th century and a lot of our revolutions, was the family. The family was the obvious unit, and meaning it's concentric. You actually have the literal family, and then it goes on from there to your township and even your kingdom, and even that is understood as a familial relationship. Right. The queen is the mother and the king is the father, and all their subjects are their children. And so I think that was a slightly more precise way to understand our groupings, because it does arise from the natural order. Right. But yeah, I think the other thing is, like you were saying, we are in this weird position now where we are no longer bound by need, at least for now. And so we actually have to go and harvest our winter food as a matter of discipline, of self-discipline, because it is a click away, and so, which is unprecedented in human history. I mean, people have had luxury at various times, but not at least like we have in this country right now. And if you're going to limit yourself to your local produce, your local harvest, you are actually going to have to gain the virtue. You have to combat your attachment to comfort and ease. And that's the personal growth and virtue, to order yourself so that you're not driven by your appetites, but you're driven by your intellect. And rather than your appetites, which we have the luxury to be now, we can just totally indulge all of our appetites. Or previously, we would be driven by a sheer limitation. You had to go out and harvest all of the chestnuts, or you weren't going to make it. We don't have that luxury of necessity prodding us by necessity to eat locally and to harvest things sufficiently and well. We actually have to do it as a conviction, as self-discipline. And that's new, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm cutting myself off, by the way, because I really truly believe we could talk for hours. Any last comments? Any last thing you want to get off your chest? Let the audience hear out of your own mouth.
Oh man, I don't know. It's been a great conversation, and I love it. I actually really look forward to tying into this land. And so if there's anyone from the cross timber in the middle of the country, which is where I am, I feel like in our section of Oklahoma, we're kind of at just the Ozarks are behind me, and we are the last strip of green and trees before we get to the long flat, of Western Oklahoma and Texas and into Colorado, and just, I don't mean it pejoratively, but the big nothing, just flat. And this is the last strip. So I'm eager and waiting to receive any traditions from anyone listening or out there about how to grow in this place in accordance with its limitations.
Marvelous. How can people get a hold of you? Farmsteadmeatsmith.com is the site. How else?
Yeah, farmsteadmeatsmith.com. A Meatsmith Harvest is our podcast, and that is everywhere. That's on iTunes, and we put all of those episodes also on our YouTube channel and on our website. And then we've got classes coming up in April here just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, very centrally located, and those will be on pig harvesting. And I just acquired a bunch of geese, and so I'm gearing up. I gotta do it a couple times myself first, but I really think that geese are the pigs of the bird world, particularly insofar as they provide salubrious fat for your kitchen, which is the medium of preservation and the means of flavor and all that is good in the home kitchen, both efficiently and by flavor. So we're going to have some geese classes rolling out here soon too, because I can't help myself. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way to stay connected.
Awesome. In sum, I think the idea of descaling the regenerative movement, if I could sum it up briefly in what I understand your words to be, it is not the reduction of size, right? In some sense it is, but in totality it's not. It's the understanding of locality and tradition, right? The regenerative movement needs tradition. I think that's what I learned today.
I think so. That's what I have found. I keep coming back to that particularly in our Meatsmith membership, where people are in it because they long for tradition. They long to receive something and ask how to live in their place.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
With that, thank you, Brandon. It has been an absolute joy. If you're listening and you like this conversation, we're going to have many more, Alan Savory, Joel Salatin, and so many more folks every other Tuesday between now and January at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up for more of these webinars at robiniainstitute.com. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.